two, three. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I ever get back. Oh, it's root for the Cubbies. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game.
This is
on the 25th of February 2019, the Monday Morning Quarterback, streaming or maybe perhaps beaming from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. As we normally do, we remember Jerry Pippin, our late and great partner. We'll have some from him the next few days as we are saying goodbye to Blog Talk. Unfortunately, our particular category of programming is ended there, and we'll be moving out the 1st of March of the last of February, whichever one comes first, I suppose. But as the great novelist once said in the Nero Wolfe series, Rick Stout, when it gets dry, we just simply move out. So we're moving out. But today we're moving on with the broadcast. Spring training baseball's open, both in Arizona and in Florida. We listened to the Cubs game yesterday, and the Cubs won the game over San Francisco. We'll have those scores in a minute here because this is the Monday Morning Quarterback. We'll be talking about Hollywood briefly here, very briefly, because we have a special program on the winner, which was called the Green Book. It was a throwback to Driving Ms. Daisy in 2099. And it's very interesting when you look at Hollywood. First of all, you have to understand that Hollywood, what's called Hollywood, collection of various studios, etc., promotion operations, are commercial operations. And they reflect the vision of corporate America primarily. This particular one was a throwback on some sort of diversity. They tried to put it up as some sort of diversity, but it really was not. The Black Panther, which was the movie that grossed the most, and followers of O.J. Simpson went out in great numbers too, did not win, and some assumed that it would win. Spike Lee did get recognized finally. After 30 plus years there, Mr. Jackson gave him the award. He was glad to get it. You know how it is. Anyway, when he did The Right Thing, this movie, The Driving Miss Daisy, about some old woman in the South looking back on the 40s or wherever she was looking back on, was the choice. Why was it the choice? Well, it was before DJ Trump to look back on a different part of America. There were two themes to the movie. There was a segregated South and an African American chauffeur that was driving her around. And she was based in Atlanta. She happened to be a sympathetic old lady. She was a Jewish character there, and it was meant to show her what's the word? Well, anyway, her not necessarily sympathy, but empathy to the movement of African people, and the chauffeur being an older man himself driving her around, which showed some humanity on the part of some sectors in the South. But at the same time, it was a feel-good movie to many people across the country that were still stuck in that particular mode. Now, it was a mode where African Americans had come past Dr. King and were, as one would say, moving on. And Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing was more emblematic of the, or embracive, I should say, of the time and the thought patterns of African Americans at the time moving forward. Now, this movie here, the Green Book, there was an actual Green Book there. What it did was depict places in the apartheid period, the segregated period. Let's use the word apartheid because it has more weight to it. We'll use an old poster's term there. It's weighted. Let's just say that that we use that term. Anyway, nonetheless, the Green Book was out there. It was actual, again, it was actually a book for where African Americans could stay when the South was closed to them in terms of hotel accommodations, unless there was happened to be an African American hotel or living quarters. Most entertainers lived in houses or what have you because they were driving about. That's what the Green Book was about. This movie was about an accomplished, very accomplished African American musician that actually lived in an apartment above Carnegie Hall. And his particular saga, he was turned to South, and evidently looking at it, we'll get to it in a minute here, but it was about a year's journey, and he hired a bouncer to be his chauffeur and put him in uniform, etc. The family was talked about, spoke out against various historic licenses taken out there that were inaccuracies, such as portraying the chauffeur as a friend of his. They're not a friend, he's just a worker. He had him in the chauffeur's outfit, and he was there to drive, but basically for security. And evidently the movie had turned the chauffeur into the hero, which we'll see, and at the same time having the employer as the sidekick. That used to be an old term going on. We're looking at the Miami Herald, and let me just get this business out. We didn't watch it, well, the Oscar that is, but the best picture was a Green Book. The best actress was Olivia Colman. She's a British actress for The Favorite. The best actor was Rami Malek of the Bohemian Rhapsody. The best director was Alfonso Cuarón of Roma, and the best supporting actress was Regina King of Beale Street Could Talk. Mashara Ali, the Green Book, was the best supporting actor, and so foreign language film it was in Espanol was Roma. Original screenplay, the Green Book. An adopted screenplay was the Black KKK one there. That was one that Spike Lee and various others were in as the adaptation there. An original song, The Star Is Born, that was Lady Gaga and so forth and so on there. And cinematography went to Roma. The best animated film, Spider-Man, I'm not sure about all that. And the score was Ludwig Göransson of the Black Panther. And the costume design went to Ruth Carter, who's been in the bed as a Black Panther. Also, production design was a Black Panther. Sound editing, Bohemian Rhapsody. The sound mix was all sound. Bohemian Rhapsody, and film editing also to John Ottman. But Bohemian Rhapsody. and the short subject, period, end, sentence, visual effects, first man, and so forth and so on. And we finish up with makeup and hairstyle with Vice, documentary feature, free solo. There was no host for this particular escapade out there. So the thing was a bit unsettled from the past, but nonetheless they made it through the whatever you want to call it. Let me just go back to this before we go to it. From the Los Angeles, we'll have a special programming on this for African History Month. Is the words of the headline in the 2019 Oscar Green Book is the worst best picture since Crash. Crash was ridiculous. Anyway, it's like the 2005 movie, Peter Farrelly, the interracial buddy drama is insulating glib and so forth and so on, and they call it the Green Book here, is an embarrassment. The film's industry's unquestionable embrace. It is another. It reduces the long, barbaric, and ongoing history of American racism to a problem of formula, a dynamic equation that can be balanced and solved. That's an interesting way. Who wrote this? Justin Chang in the LA Times. I like the way it's worded. The difference between the two movies are telling as a similar crash of modern day streamfests that ratcheted up cross-cultural tensions by the minute meant to leave you angry and so forth. The Oscar triumph was a genuine shocker. It clearly has its fans, but it has many of its inferiority was self-evident. The Green Book, a slick crowd pleaser set in the Deep South. That was in 1962, and it won the award at the People's Choice Award at Toronto International Film Festival. It is about a doctor named Shirley, about Don Shirley. He was a concert pianist. He toured the South with an Italian-American bouncer named Tony Lip. Vassaloner. Anyway, we'll get it. Anyway, the person that played him was a relative of this person. The writer was a relative. Anyway, Vigizo Mortensen. The Green Book serves up bare-faced clinches and stereotypes with a adultery that almost qualifies as disarming. Anyway, there's a lot of criticism of this, and genuinely criticism has often been compared to Crash and the 1989 picture Driving Miss Daisy, another attempt to bridge the racial divide through a story of a driver and his employer in the American South. Driving Miss Daisy was adopted from a play. The Green Book was co-written by Nick Vassaloner with Farrelly and Curry. Anyway, it was co-written by this Nick character here, and he was part of the family. His father, with sort of urban legends coming forward there. And we won't go too much into this because the truth about the Green Book, this is from Vanity Fair, and the movie hasn't exactly been a runaway hit. Its box office take home has been a slow, and this was when it was written. Well, sometimes they don't like to give me my dates that I want to get. Anyway, it doesn't matter when it was written, but it just says there's a lot of stories about racism that have been told and are being told and that should be told. That's from Nick Logano, one of the film's screenwriters. It happened to my father. The way that it happened. Bartolona is his son's film protagonist, Tony Lips, an Italian-American bouncer as played by Mortensen, who was hired to escort an African-American pianist, Dr. Shirley, through the Jim Crow South. And they tried to claim it was researched meticulously. And, of course, the family spoke out against it as a pack of no more than blatant lies. And we'll get into this when we do our special episode on the Green Book. Stay tuned for that particular one. And let me start the lineup here. We'll use the Washington Post today as a lineup. Some former national security officials speak out against the emergency. This is DJ Trump's emergency. There's a lineup of those from Madeleine Albright to Chuck Hagel. And the House is going to file a lawsuit. So these people are in there, and they include a lot of people from Elliot Cohen, Susan Rice. A lot of people remember her. Leon Panetta, they remember him because of his emails. He was at one time former intelligence and security official on the Democrats and Republicans. So the names go on there. And Trump's so-called national emergency, we'll leave it where it is. And the Times also has Racism Isn't Dead, Black Americans Still Need a Green Book. This is a very interesting one here by Jan Mills, is the author of Post-Racial, the Negro Green Book. If you watch the movie Green Book, you might leave the cinema thinking that people who made the movie are convinced that American racism is dead in one idyllic, snowy Christmas Eve in the warm glow of a Bronx apartment in 1962 when the pianist, how you want to pronounce it, I think I'd do it like probably he would, Don Shirley accepted a Denver invitation from his Italian American driver, that is this Tony Lips character here, and rolls the credits. The movie, like the Green Book, with their story built on racism as experienced through the eyes of a good-hearted European, they are worse than disserviceable. They are dangerous. They are mission accomplished. Banners suspended above America. They are the girls from the proverb. Post-racial mill in the middle of a true story Green Book world. Cops no longer harass African American motorists. Die in the wool racist. Hold on a minute. Acquiesce with insolent snug. To the changing times. Well, a guy in Alabama that wrote the editorial, he's selling his paper, incidentally. We live in a real world, though, and African Americans still get guides like the Green Book of the movie titles as we set out to explore the U.S. The Green Book is a reference to the Negro Green Motorist Green Book, a real life guide for African American tourists in the segregated or apartheid South. The editions of the book were issued annually from 1936 to 1966. The creator was a postal worker named Victor Green. Once wrote optimistically, as it turns out, there will be a day sometime in the near future when this guide will not have to be published. That is when we as a race will have equal opportunity and privilege in the U.S. by the end of the Negro Green Book era, which naturally followed the legal death of segregation, not the cultural death, must be interpreted as the death of racism. I'm aware that how terrifyingly not dead the virtually dangerous forms of racism were around in 2014 as the demonic conversion of social media, lightning fast news cycles, and cell phones and video recording captured my Facebook timeline with seemingly endless parade of horrors. Perhaps as a coping mechanism, I started keeping track, logging the incidents and related scholarly reports and data on a simple website. A subsequent reading of the book, 100 Years of Lynching, a harrowing compilation of news articles dealing with black deaths at the hands of white Americans, led me to commit the information that I was compiling to a printed page. I decided to borrow the format and the authentic Negro motorist book with a hopeful outlook of the U.S. near future as a commentary. Results of first edition of post-racial Negro Green Book provides a true snapshot of contemporary U.S. race relations. Other modern projects bear forth the legacy of the Negro motorist Green Book in New Orleans, where I live. I stay clear of certain businesses based on a word-of-mouth reputation for racist management or their history of racist incidents. Aiding myself in the endeavor, the New Orleans Black Book, a local directory of black businesses for weary citizens that cites amongst us impertinencies of the race pronouncements emulating from the incendiary racists from the highest office in the land. A simple resource that's currently on to develop. The Black Friendly Flag Project is a brainchild of DC. I always say that DC based activists. It intends to be a social enterprise that makes it easy for black-friendly businesses connect with like-minded customers seeking a welcome space. Both of these projects serve eventually the same function as the ostensibly outdated Negro motorist Green Book. Not outdated. That's why you see these hats running around here on America. Anyway, I'm aware that that America continuously assaulting my Facebook timeline. The America that I have factually presented in my book, it is generally speaking not the same nation, but white Americans see numerous recent exchanges with white colleagues. She called them that. We use a more approximate term, European friends, that have made me realize that exposure to black realities, contemporary and historical, often just isn't there. That the whole thing they know or care about are affected by are all too often limited to their own circumstances. Old Hume comes in there. But they don't have to understand systematic racism or its implicit bias or school-to-prison pipelines, because these issues don't even exist for them. Such movies as the Green Book give them soft focus treatment to racism and provide a feel-good ending that places racism squarely in the past. Doesn't help. For this reason, the Green Book has justly inspired heated debate at this Oscar season. Those arguments may end on Sunday night. I know they have not, but at least the questions that should stay with the movie lovers and all Americans, no matter the outcome of the Academy Awards. This is the 2019 Black Traveler still needs some version of the Green Book to navigate our country's safely as a way of minimizing our experience of discrimination, to what it takes to fulfill Victor Green's dream. Dr. King had a dream. Victor Green had a good dream. And it goes on. And this was by Jan Mills. She's off of post-racial Negro Green Book, and we look forward to reviewing that book. Let me move on very quickly here. This is the Black Friendly Flag and the New Orleans Black Book there. And let me just look at our time here, and we'll get to E.J. Dion, and we have to have this balanced here. History remarked how many Republicans shied from Trump's extremism. It is a picture here of Nelson Rockefeller, former governor of the Empire State, New York. In 1964, Nelson Rockefeller rose before the Republican convention to condemn extremists who had no plan, no program to keep peace and bring freedom to the world. Amidst boos, catcalls from right-wingers on the floor, Rockefeller denounced those who spread distrust and engendered suspicion and encouraged disunity. There's no place in the Republican Party, declared this stood of progressivism for such hawkers of hate and such purveyors of prejudice and fabricators of fear. You wonder why Rocky would make of President Trump and the movement he has nurtured to make America great again. And you'd sure wish someone like Rockefeller was around today to call his party back to reason and tolerance. The events of recent days ought to try the conscience of Republicans who know that extremism and hate are wrong, and in many of the parties acknowledgments, usually in private, that the president has continued to has rooted his political appearance in vicious attacks against his opponents and a quote-unquote free press. He has invested in crisis for the purpose of stroking drift in horror. He has targeted minority groups, people of color, immigrants especially, to harvest political support. In the meantime, the party as a whole has abandoned the embrace of civil rights, voting rights, that has been from Lincoln's era to Rockefeller's time the GOP calling card. Well, Rocky soon vanished that. Mimicking the segregationist Democrats of the past, Republicans have of late used the unfound specter of voter fraud, same old scheme right there, to justify voter ID laws and other measures is squarely aimed at impeding the access to ballot boxes by African Americans and the young. Well, it had to expand as a logical progression beyond African Americans. These things usually start as a target group, as it did in chicken groups of Hitler's Germany, but it soon spreads to the wider society, and that's what has happened here. In North Carolina, the Board of Elections that a Republican candidate named Harris, who found himself accused of massive voter fraud. As a result, they threw out the whole election and called a new one. Should have called a new presidential election in 2000. In 2017, Trump needed a presidential commission that scouted the country for instances of in-person voter fraud that might justify the party's voter suppression efforts. It was such a bust that the commission itself had to be disbanded just 8 months later. The person that led that was the Secretary of State in Kansas named Cobalt. He ran for governor and was defeated. Implementing voting rights needs to be called what is an act of extremism. It is a radically anti-democratic anti-democratic to keep your opponent from voting, where the Republicans who will speak out loudly and clearly against what their party has done in many instances that they controlled. An even more startling development was news that the police in Maryland arrested somebody named Hassan, a lieutenant in the Coast Guard, and a self-described white supremacist. Well, even self-described he was. The authorities said he stockpiled weapons and drew up a list of liberal politicians and commentators who he wanted to kill. His target list included Senators Warren, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Blumenthal, what he called the Blumen Jew. Anyway, Joe Scarborough, so forth, and Chris Hayes. Who else was on his list? Even if many Republicans have no problem these days of labeling nearly all Democrats socialists based upon the self-description of a few in the party's ranks, it's obvious that no one should call out the entire GOP for plotting a fanatical would-be assassin. Well, this whole thing is, and this is one of the problems that so-called liberals in the Democratic Party or wherever have a problem, a little bit of red baiting here doesn't help your cause. DJ Trump and company will take care of that. It is important to examine public statements of the president himself, his efforts to divide the country, and his constant demoralizing of those who oppose him. Let's go back to Rockefeller's words the day after Trump truly as the hawker of hate, the purveyor of prejudice, and the fabricator of fear. Prejudice and fears are at the heart of this invocation of national emergency powers to build this wall, and abuse of authority that ought to be horrifying to all who proudly call themselves constitutional conservatives. The good news is the Republicans will soon have an opportunity to tell us who they are. The Speaker Pelosi has called a vote this week, and the measure rejecting the emergency declaration. The House is virtually certain to pass it. The Senate, by law, is required to take it up. It's too much to say that history will notice how many Republicans choose to separate themselves from Trump's extremism. Well, Trump's extremism, and this is something that people on the progressive side, and many on the progressive side, and particularly the Democratic Party, have rallied around this false flag operation in Venezuela. This is more of Trump's program, although he's going to visit the chairman of the People's Democratic Republic of Korea, Mr. Chairman Un, in Vietnam, Hanoi. It had been unthinkable during Nixon's term, Johnson's term, Reagan's term, for an American president, even during Bill Clinton's term, and even Obama's term, for an American president to go to Hanoi, Vietnam, and visit with the chair of the Democratic Republic of Korea's Communist Party in a communist country to talk about peace. This is an interesting dynamic, and at the same time, here's the other member of the Trump-Pence gang. Pence is meeting in Colombia, this right-wing operation there, under the right-wingers' leadership, to plot other schemes to overthrow the democratically elected government in Venezuela of Nicolas Maduro Mora. And this is unheard of. They had a scheme to provoke the authorities there, the security forces. Did not work. They did not deliver any food, which they promised to, and medication. They didn't get anything done. They were blocked on the land. They were blocked on the sea. They threw rocks and stuff at the security forces, and said the security forces provoked it. Didn't happen. Then they said, well, we had some people defected. It went from double-digit defection now to over 100 people that quote-unquote defected there on the border. Well, if that many people defected from the photos, there would have been no security left at the border. I mean, this is farcical. Well, this shows you what happens. Even our hero Bernie Sanders got caught in the track by basically saying that President Maduro should let the supplies in, when in fact the majority of the world, the UN, says no, and the Red Cross, etc. In fact, they even have characters there that are impersonating the Red Cross. So none of this is working. So what do? Invade now? There's articles out, well, they could knock out the Venezuelan air defenses. So what? The war still goes on. And no doubt those defenses have been upgraded and being upgraded. They're not idiots anymore out there. And the armed forces, of course, is well trained, well armed, and will be there. So they have no other scheme than to invade. Well, this problem is it will carry over into Colombia, and where it stops next. At the U.S.-Mexican border, supposedly that would be Trump. He would claim that. But the whole of the Americas literally could spread into a war zone. It's something the American people don't need, the Venezuelan people don't need, Colombia doesn't need. But why is it all done? It's the assets of Venezuela, period. Let me move on here. So we did get Venezuela, and incidentally there was also in Cuba, before we forget, they had a constitutional referendum there. People were voting on Sunday to ratify their new constitution. We'll do a special programming on that. I know the special programs are just stacking up. And that sometimes unfortunately happens. February being a short month in African History Month, and we have all these things stacking up at once. Possible war in Venezuela, the Cuban constitution, new constitution being ratified. Then we have the catastrophe at the Oscars with the movie called The Green Book. I mean, we have all these things floating around here at once. And we then, let me throw in Justin Fairbanks. He made a statement before, we have to cover this, before the legislature in Virginia on their last day, saying that he is being electronically lynched like Clarence Thomas. So we have all these things going at once, and it's the opening of baseball season. Let's go to ESPN, and I'll just do the scores here. Where do we start? Well, we'll do spring training. This is baseball spring training. Finally, the Astros were at the Mets. The Astros at 10-1. Atlanta was at the Astros 5-2. Now the Astros evidently played on two teams. Had two teams going at once. The Marlins and Pirates 10-6. And the Twins and the Red Sox. The Red Sox won 8-5. The Yankees and Rays. It was the Yankees 8-5. The Phillies and the Tigers. Phillies 10-6. The Blue Jays and Orioles. The Orioles pulled it out 9-8. The Nationals and Cardinals. The Nationals 12-2. The D-backs and Cleveland. The D-backs 12-3. The Cubbies and Giants, a game we listened to, 9-5 Cubbies. The Royals and Athletics, Royals 14-5. The Angels and Dodgers. The Dodgers finally win something, 13-9. The White Sox and Padres. The Padres 5-4. The Mariners and the Rockies. The Mariners 4-2. The Reds and Angels. The Reds 14-2. And finally the Brewers and the Rangers. It was the Brewers 10-1. On we go to the National Basketball Association, who's playing real games. The Magic and the Raptors. It was the Magic 113-98. The Clippers and Nuggets in Denver. It was the Nuggets 123-96. And finally the Spurs and Knickerbockers. It was the Knicks 130-118. On to college basketball on the men's side, 2 games there. The Michigan State and Michigan, it was a State 77-70 over Michigan, and Villanova and Xavier, it was Xavier 66-54. A short list. And to the women's hoops, college hoops that is, USC and Oregon, it was the Ducks 96-78. UConn and Tulsa, it was UConn 68-49. Boston College and Louisville, it was Louisville still a powerhouse, 87-55. Vanderbilt and Mississippi State, it was Mississippi State by 16 points, 86-70. Arizona State and Stanford, it was Stanford 71-50. North Carolina State and North Carolina, it was North Carolina State 74-69. Xavier and Marquette, it was Marquette 79-53. USC and Oregon State, it was Oregon State 75-72. South Carolina and Tennessee, South Carolina 82-67. Florida State and Miami, the University of Miami, 64-54. University of Miami. LSU and Kentucky, it was Kentucky 57-52. And in overtime, South Dakota, and wait a minute here. Well, South Dakota and South Dakota. Well, one must be South Dakota State. Oh, and South Dakota. Anyway, 82-73. I was seeing things here. Indiana State and Drake. It was Drake 96-77. And finally on to the NBA, the National Hockey League. Rangers and Capitals in an overtime. It was the Capitals 6-5. The Sharks and Red Wings. It was the Sharks 5-3. The Stars and Blackhawks in Chicago. Stars pulled that one out 4-3. The Flames and Senators. Flames 2-1. The Blues and Wild. It was the Wild 2-1 in an OT over the Blues of St. Louis, and the Jets of Winnipeg were defeated by the Coyotes. Arizona Coyotes. Oh well. Anyway, 4-1. Hopefully the Coyotes don't literally freeze to death. This will do it for us. I am debating whether or not to append the Cuban elections there. I'll see how much it is, and perhaps I will, where you can listen to the sounds and voices of this election. It was an election for a new 2019 Constitution, and you get an idea of how vast or expansive, we use a lot of adjectives here all at once, the outreach was in the communities, on social media, TV, etc., and how people actually agonized, cajoled, debated one another on what went into this final Constitution. From the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth, Boston Red. Have a good week, everyone, and good day. Incidentally, we have a Numbers Man episode out. Warren Buffett is featured, and Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett's impressions of the Trump administration, and a little from the Fed, something called the Phillips curve.